So working with our coloring book, even though we're not going to take this all the way through into the full coloring app, we are going to be able to learn a couple things that are new and different that do apply for the next project. So we will be integrating some of this content into our next activity. So as it stands right now, when we look at it, we can see where we have the different panels showing up, where we could choose our artwork. We have what will be the painting area there. We can send, and then we have a response going through. So that gives us a starting point to work with. With that, we're going to go in and start defining out the script. So the first thing that we need to do, as always, is going to be, we need to access our different items. If I can type it correctly. So we use the query selector. This time I'll grab choose for our first item. And I know there's 4 panels. The next one will be paint. I'm going to follow that up with send, and finally we'll end it with response. So this now gives me access to the first items that we need as part of our project. I have control of those items. We'll set the class name for each of those items. And what we want to see is we want to see the choose. One will have display block. Actually, we'll paste it in one time. This will be display none, but it won't be choose, it'll be paint. And then for the next one, send, and finally response. So now I can save this. If I jump over to my document, I will see that the other panels have indeed disappeared. I can't get out of my choosing panel. So that gives me a good start for what we're working on. So I have my 4 panels, I have control of them. Now there's a few more things that we will need access to. I will need the container. So the container contains my original images that I'm allowing the selection to take place with. So we can see inside this div I have those 6 images. And then we use container and grid to position them on screen. So with the container, we need control of that. So container, document, query selector. In this case, it, for whatever reason, has a class on it because the autocomplete for creating a div assigns a class, not an ID, when working in Atom. So I just rolled with it. Now the next thing we're going to do is grab the group of images inside the container. And to do that, what we're going to use is something a little bit different. So we're going to say container images is going to be equal to the container object that we now know about, but instead of query selector, we're going to say getElementsByTagName. And now the tag name we're going to be looking for is image. To understand a little bit of how that is working, I have put a link up here from W3 Schools, and we can see where it gets all the elements with that tag name. It's a pretty straightforward thing, but what it allows us to do is when we grab the elements by tag name, it's actually creating an array of those objects, and we can reference them with their array value or position within that array. So if I were to look at this one, we can see we have 2 paragraphs here. So if I want the inner HTML of paragraph 0, the first one to change, I would click try it, and we would see how that first paragraph has now changed its value. So going back into the Atom file here. So that allows me to get all the elements. And the reason that we're doing it this way is instead of making a reference where I'd say let image 1 equal document query selector image 1, let image 2 equal document query selector 2, we can now use a different command where I will use for of. So I will say let item of container images. So we say we're doing a for loop. We've done for loops where we use a strict iteration as we move over elements, but in this case we don't have to know how many. We just say for each item in container images. Now in container images is an array of objects. I'm going to say item add event listener, click, and then the function I'll make is called move to paint state, and then we don't want it to bubble, so we'll say false. To show us that this is working without having to click on each of these, I'm going to say item dot class name equals, and we'll call this red border. Now I don't have a class called red border yet, but I'll just make one right here, red border, and it will just simply be border 1 pixel. I'll make it even bigger, 2 pixel solid red. So now when I save this, if I click back over here, we'll see, oh, because I didn't define move to paint state yet, it's having issues with it. So that's causing an error. I forgot to stub that out. So function move to paint state. And now we have that function do something. So now when I save this and go over here, we'll see it added in those red borders. Now I'm having an issue trying to download these different pictures because the pictures are coming from online sources, and PlaceCage and Phil Murray are sometimes slow. PlaceKitten works better. Back in our code, now what we want to do is I want to say choose.class name is going to be equal to display none, and paint.class name is going to be equal to display block. Now if we go check this out, what we will see is that if I click here, we're now in the paint. Now we have our other buttons are save and start over. They're not working yet, so we can't move into our next states, but at least we have a good start going with it. So now that I have been able to switch states, we're going to keep that up for the other states before we then do a little bit of work with the canvas and some other things to make our code better. Now, what I want to do next is to be able to verify, well, we'll save writing to the canvas to the end. So with that, we need to find our next 2 buttons. So we're going to have save is equal to document query selector, and our button has an ID of save on it. Actually, to speed this up, then we will do save event listener, click, and it will call our save function. And false. And then function. Save function is going to tell us to have paint dot class name. It's going to be equal to display block, and then we will, oh no, sorry, not display block, display none, because we're in paint. We want to make paint go away, and then after we do that, we will say send class name. It's going to be equal to display block. So this is our save function. Once again, it's a good idea to test. So I click on an image. Now I go to save. So we can see how we're working our way through the different items. Now what we'll notice is if that's how save works, then I'm going to change this and say start over. Nope, should have changed this one as well. Number function, and then we go back to choose. Save it, check it out, click on the kitty, start over, we're back there, click on cage, go there, click, save. So as you can see, it's starting to shape up and come together. Now, once we're in here, now we have our send button. So now we need to grab our send one, and let's just space these out a little bit so it's easier to see. So it has the idea of send mail on it. So if we look here, idea is send mail, then we'll have restart will be on that final one. So send mail will then tell send to go away, response to show up. And now we can save, click, save, send, and now we need start over to do something, and that has the ID of restart on it. So I'm going through here holding down Command Control if you're on Windows to be able to multi-select. And then this tells our response to go away and choose to reappear. So when we look through what is happening here, what we can see is that we are able to navigate through our entire thing. Click on the kitten, click on save, click on send, click on start over. So currently we have made good progress organizing this, but if you look here, this is we're doing the exact same thing pretty much. It'd be nice if we had a little cleaner way to organize that swapping of these panels or screens with what we're working on. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new function, and this function will be function swap panels. And when I swap panels, what I want to do is I want to pass in two panels. I'll pass in an A panel and a B panel. The A panel will set its class name to display none. The B panel will say display block. So it will look like a.class_name is equal to display none, and B class name will be equal to display block. So instead of referencing each one right there, what I can say is swap panels, and now I just pass in response and choose. So when doing it this way, this ends up being a much cleaner, more organized way of doing it, so that I have this function that's taking over setting the classes. So I'm going to this function and then passing in the two classes that I want to swap out. So we'll repeat that into all of them. And you'll notice I kept the order none-block consistent on all of these, so it makes it easy when we are refactoring our code. And that's what this process is called, is we are refactoring what we've created to make our code cleaner and ultimately more organized. So this process of refactoring is part of the iterative way of coding, where we start out and we get it to work. Once we have it working, we then verify that it's working. So I'm going to save that, jump over to this, and I'll say, okay, that worked. Start over, yep, worked. Save, send, start over. So we can get through our different panels, because we're going to be using these panels in the actual project we're going to be working on, which is going to allow us to access the camera on the device. So hopefully whatever device we're working on has either a webcam or, say, a phone that would have a mobile camera. So we can take a picture. We're going to take that picture, we're going to put it onto a canvas object, and once it's on the canvas object, we're going to be able to drag additional items onto that canvas, and then we will be able to save or download that photo if we are working on a computer device. In my JavaScript, now that I verified it all works, I'm going to just get rid of these items because I don't need them any longer. Now, realistically, it's possible that we could make this even more. We could skip all of these functions and just write what's called an anonymous function inside here for each one of these items as well. That would be another way of doing it. It would be even more concise, but I think this is still, on the readability scale, a little bit easier to read that way. But it definitely organizes things much better. So we're getting control of our images here, but we're not doing anything with them yet. And that's what the next stage of this is going to be, is that we're going to work with it. So once again, we had the getElementsByTagName, and that grabbed all of the, in our case, images, and put them into an array. When things are in an array, we can then use the square bracket notation to access them. and that allows us to then access specific ones in that array if we want to, or we can cycle through that array of objects, and we do that in this case by using the for of. So we say for the item that we're working with and the array that we're working with. So I could write out the word images, and in this case it doesn't even matter what word I write here, it just means it's going to be, this is just a variable reference to each one of these objects that we want to do something with. In this example, of course, it's just logging out those elements. But if this said something else, and I just called this Fred, and then logged out Fred, it's still going to give me that same result. So the name that we put here is not critical. I could call this XZY, and run, and yep, it still works. Now, the one thing I don't want to do is use reserve words when I'm putting it here. So it's a lowercase letter. So if I said lowercase letter, again, we can hit run and we see that it works. So this is a way to do a for loop. It allows us to iterate or to do something to each element or item in this array. And that's part of why when I wrote mine, I chose to use the word item, because I'm saying for each item in my container images, because I don't want to use image for fear of hitting a reserved word, but I could say let container image of container images, plural, which is a common way that people write for of loops, is they refer to it. And other times you just say L or element or something, because you're saying each element or item within that array of objects, we're going to do something to it. So ultimately what I want to have happen is I want to be here, when I click on that image, I wanted to take that image and draw that image into my canvas. And then you're left going, okay, what's a canvas? Well, the canvas is the area, it's the collection of pixels that we can then draw on with JavaScript. So it's something that was introduced in HTML5, and when it came out, it was pretty amazing because now we can draw on the pixels of our screen. We don't have to have, well, we have unlimited flexibility when we do this. Canvases by their nature are transparent, so we can create some real fun graphics where we can draw a canvas on top of an existing web page and make something cool happen to the pixels on the screen. We can have multiple canvases, we can stack them on top of each other, we can have canvases that are used for storing visual information that then we use to construct images, which is part of what we will be doing later when we work with our camera functions, that we will have a canvas that we're writing to, then we will create an image element, then we will use that image element to write to a second canvas, and then that canvas we will then be manipulating and working with. So it's just a crazy, crazy thing. But to work with a canvas, we have a canvas element that we'll put on our screen using the canvas tag. Now we have to access that canvas, and then to write to the pixels of the canvas, what we end up doing is we have to get the context of that canvas, and we say 2D. We're getting the 2D context of that canvas. So we say canvas get context 2D. Now you can see the canvas they're referring to here is the variable name of the element that in this case had an ID of my house. Then we grab the context. And the context is what we tell instructions to it. So we say context draw this, context draw that. We say begin a path, move to line 2, and then it draws those lines, and it would look like this, and it draws that house. So then we can create images that way. If you look on the left over here in this link, you're going to find that we have a lot more methods to work with beyond just simply line 2, draw 2. The one we'll be working with is draw image. So if I go over to draw image, I can see that I tell my context to draw image, we specify what image element I am drawing and where I am drawing it. I can also specify not only where I'm drawing it, but how big I want it to be. I can even draw part of an image by specifying what image, and then I can specify the source X and Y within that image and how much of that image, the width and height of that source image I'm trying to capture, and then write it or draw it to a destination. So in this case, sources, S is referring to source, D is referring to destination. I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. What we will care about are these first two. We tell the context to draw the image. So to do that, I want to go back up into my page here, and I'll see that on my painting panel that there is a canvas. It has an ID of painting. So now I need to gain control of that. Now we can put that kind of anywhere we want, except we're going to be referencing that item down here, because then, or when we move to the paint state, then we're going to be grabbing the image that has been selected, and then we're going to do something with it. So because of that, I am going to then reference it right here. So let C equal document query selector painting. Let CTX, my context, be equal to C.get context to D. So that now gains control of it. Now, once I have control of it, and I'm going to swap panels, I want to find out which picture I clicked on. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to let my image source be equal to, now I need to know which item was clicked on. So in order to know that, I want to have a reference to this element that I clicked on. So this is going to be the item that was clicked, and we will use that. So we've used that before, where we're going to be specifying which item with shorthand E as part of it. So now that I have put that E in there, I can say E.target .get attribute and then the attribute I want to get is the source. So if I go back to the images, I will see the images when I'm clicking on them. These images have a source. The source is the image that is being drawn. So now that I have access to the source, there we go, I lost my page here. What we can do is we're going to tell our context to draw that image, and I'll say E.current target, and I will draw it 50 pixels in and 50 pixels down. So we're going to explain this in a little bit more detail, but first let's see it in action and see how that works. So now going back into my project, no errors, that's good. If I click on Cage here, we can see it now drew Nicolas Cage onto this canvas of pixels over here. So that's really pretty cool. Click here, we get Bill Murray. Click here, I get the kitten. So all's right with the universe right now. Things are shaping up for us. So to understand what is happening with this whole thing here, where I have my target, I have my current target. So going back over here, and we'll look at these links on it. So we have the canvas. Now get attribute is a pretty awesome thing. So we just say the element that we want to get to an attribute, whatever attribute we're looking for. So in this case, if we needed to find out the align value of this object, we could find out what its align value has been set to. Now, what we're doing in this case is I'm using the get attribute as part of it. So I'm grabbing the source of the item that's been clicked on. Now you'll see that I've used both target and current target as a way to access these, and we'll be taking a look at what is target, current target, comparison of target and current target. Now, one of the things I do want you to start to get accustomed to is reading through documentation. So looking through on the Mozilla, the MDM website, we can read the documentation and try and understand a little bit of what is happening with it to understand target versus current target and see what is happening there. Now, I've also made a short little code pen here. Now, on this code pen, we can see there's nothing in the HTML. The HTML is being generated dynamically by the JavaScript. So we create an element, a UL, then we append that to the body. Then we are going to create a couple LIs, append those to the UL, and then fill their text content with hi and bye. Now, if I look here under target, so to understand how target and current target are different, we'll see that the UL has add event listener click applied to it. So now if I click on by, it goes away. Now keep in mind, function hide, so we call hide, but we put that on the UL. But I clicked on an LI, and the LI went away. So this event listener is being applied to both the children, the LIs, as well as the parent element. If I click there, it goes away. We'll run, bring it back. Now if I click on hi, click on then by, then click on UL, so I can see how I can click on all of it. But if I change it to current target, get rid of target, now run it, if I click on by, the whole thing goes away. So current target will then refer to the item that has the event listener. Target is going to differentiate between the individual children as well as the parent object. So the event will work individually on each one of those. So they behave a little bit different. So it can get confusing at times. In our instance here, as we are working with this, it's not as critical. So I'm using both here. You'll see target, current target, and it works because target and current target both return the same value. So if I were to log this out, now I'm going to use a different way of logging it out. So I could use quotes and pluses and all kinds of things like that, but there's also where we can use this it's called a template literal, which is easier to think about than to say. Now I'm using the hash mark under the tilde, so you'll notice it's not the standard, it's not the vertical hash over by return, but it's the one in the top left corner of the keyboard. And now if I want to put a variable in here, so what I can say is I can say target like this, and now for a variable, if I want to show it, I use a $, curly braces, and now I can reference any JavaScript object within that. And now I can just put a comma, put a couple spaces, and then I'll say current target. And again, $, curly braces. But I do need to, target and current target don't have any value without putting the E in front of it. So the events target and the events current target. So now if we look at this, so I could write this same thing out, but instead of using the hash mark like that, then I would put this in quotes, and get rid of that hash there, get rid of this hash here, would put this inside of quotes along with those spaces, And then I'd have to do a plus and do a plus. So we can write this out. So this line here is generating the same value as this line here. I would argue that this with the template literal is easier to read because I don't have to break it into all these with multiple quotes, pluses. It's really easy to forget something and to create an error. The key thing is, remember, we're using $ and curly braces. Both will give me the same result. So now if I save this, jump over here, run my page, click there, target, object HTML element, current target, object HTML element. So in this particular instance, because I'm clicking on the item that has the event listener, that's why I can get away with using both target and current target, and neither one is giving me a problem. So both are working just fine in this case, but that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes if you use target and your code isn't working right, switch to current target and you go, oh, now that one works and it gives me what I want. And if you're unsure of what target or current target is going to give you, log it out. When you log it out, then you can see very directly whether it's giving you the result that you want or not. So now I've been able to refactor my code to make it cleaner using the swap panel function, passing in the two objects that I want to modify. I am using a for of loop to cycle through all the images so I don't have to identify each one directly. I'm grabbing control of my canvas, and then I am drawing an image onto my canvas. So that works out pretty slick as a way to be able to navigate through my project and work with it. So this multi-panel approach that we're only showing the instructions or information that we need at a given time is something that we will use in the project that we are going to be working on.